And then we do, I believe, need to think about taxation. Now, again, there's no magic wand. It's important we consider who has the broadest shoulders.
I think if Rachel Reeves was listening to this podcast, she'd absolutely hate what you just said about wealth taxes, and I think she's very opposed.
I have to say I've not spoken directly with her about this.
Hello, it's Beth here, and what a summer treat I have for you, because Parliament's out for August, but we're still going on ED and we've got some special episodes. So today I want to take you inside Labour's first year of government under Keir Starmer with someone incredibly close to the Prime Minister. For those of you who don't know Anneliese Dodds, she started in this government as the Minister for International Development and Minister for Women and Equalities before this dramatic moment in February.
Breaking news, the Government Minister Anneliese Dodds has written to the Prime Minister to resign her position as International Development Minister, also Minister for Women and Equalities, saying that she disagrees with the government's decision to cut overseas aid. In her letter of resignation to the Prime Minister, she said, "You have maintained that you want to continue support for Gaza, Sudan and Ukraine, for vaccination, for climate and for rules-based systems. Yet it will be impossible to maintain these priorities given the depth of the cuts. The effect will be far greater than presented."
Now, Anneliese became Starmer's first government minister to resign over government policy. And if that didn't hurt enough, her resignation had a particular sting because of how close she was to Keir Starmer. She is to Keir Starmer. She was his closest ally, his Shadow Chancellor for a year before Rachel Reeves got the post. So this is a special interview with Anneliese Dodds. She's now a backbench Labour MP, and because she doesn't do a lot of long-ranging chats like this, we're going to use this time to reflect on Labour's first year in power. We want her to lift the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes and what actually happens when you resign from government. I should say, if you're not watching this on YouTube, Anneliese has come dressed in the magenta of Electoral Dysfunction. I think Harriet Harman, when she watches this on YouTube, will be very approving of that. I do remember actually there was it the 2015 election campaign when Harriet Harman had her bus? Do you remember this, Anneliese?
I do.
Do you remember?
Yes,
and I was on that
bus.
and it was a discussion about was it pink or magenta, and I think it was magenta, and I think it was a bit like the ED colour. Not that we did it in honour of Harriet Harman, but you look lovely in your dress, so thank you for coming in. And what I wanted to ask you to start with is, if you could, in a word, try and describe what you think the first year of the Labour government has been in a word, and then later we could come back and you can say what you think the second year might be in a word. Is that doable, or is that really annoying?
It's not really annoying. It's challenging, which is possibly the word that I would choose. Yeah. It was always going to be challenging. Obviously, we knew particularly the fiscal situations, the situation with the amount of money in the government coffers was going to be difficult. We already knew that. Obviously, it was even worse than we expected, and I saw that myself when I came into the department that I was working in. But also, since that coming into government, of course, we've seen so much geopolitical turbulence that I think very few people could have imagined.
Yeah, the arrival of Trump in the White House in January really did change things up a lot, didn't it? In a way that perhaps the government hadn't anticipated would happen. Is that what you're alluding to there?
I mean, I think there's a broader question, not just for the government, for all politicians, arguably, if I may say so, for the media as well. I think there was an assumption that support for Ukraine might be reduced a bit, but very, very few people anticipated the kind of scenes that we've seen since. So a really big change, and obviously quite different to Trump's first term as well, particularly what we've seen around trade. I mean, there were many suggestions previously in his first term. He did make many economic policy changes, but the extent of that turbulence, yes, it's been different this time round.
It has been different, and I think there would be many of your colleagues still around that cabinet table that would think that challenging would be a fair a fair and accurate description. I mean, let's start here though, Anneliese. Like, what have they got right? Like, what have they done in the past year that you've thought, yeah, I'm glad you did that?
I think making those changes that are going to be important for the long term. I mean, the really big capital investment changes that Rachel put in, which are going to be really important for realising more growth in the future. The Employment Relations Bill, that's going to be really important, I mean, particularly for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, us Queenagers. It is going to make a big difference.
Oh, I'm nicking that.
Well, I didn't make it up. I didn't use it first, but I love it. So I'm going to keep it.
I love it more. I'm a Queenager.
Definitely.
Oh, Anneliese, you've given me a lot of joy there. Okay, carry on.
And I think also starting to make those big changes with the NHS. I mean, obviously, it's not easy to say that you're going to remove NHS England, for example, but that's necessary, and we're starting to see that feed through. Of course, it's not yet radically changing people's experience of the NHS because the system was so broken before. But I think that, as I say, to use that word again, the challenge for us is that the economic situation is that much harder, given that global turbulence, that delivering all of this, as we do so, isn't going to be enough for people necessary to feel much better off.
It feels at the moment, if you were the Chancellor, every which way you look, there is a problem, there is a roadblock, there is a mountain to climb. You know, you've had inflation is on the rise. Again, the pound is weakening. There's reversals on spending cuts that puts more pressure on the public finances. I mean, you, Anneliese, clearly one of the major things that you think they got wrong, that you couldn't yourself abide with collective responsibility. And collective responsibility is when, if you're a member of the government, you abide by collective responsibility, which means that even if there's a decision you don't agree with, you have to publicly back it. It's your collective responsibility to sign up to the government agenda. If you can't do that, that's when you resign from government. And obviously, Anneliese, that's what you did on the matter of reallocating the development overseas development budget to defence. Is there anything else you think they fumbled?
I mean, I think, as I said before, it's very difficult to face up to this huge change that we've seen. And obviously, and I was involved in a lot of the policy development that we did in opposition over many, many years. That wasn't assuming we would see those huge demands for additional defence spending, really significant. Plus, as I said, all that turbulence around trade, which really hits us as a country. So I think what we have to do, and it's very difficult to do this in government with day-to-day decisions, but it's to be able to take a step back and to think, have we really risen to the size of the challenge that we've got now? And that's why when I did resign, very reluctantly, but I felt I had to be able to look myself in the mirror, to be honest. When I resigned, I said I felt there had to be a bigger discussion about, in particular, our fiscal rules and taxation. And I don't think that just applies when it came to that issue around defence spending. I think it also relates to what happened in relation to social security, where I think it can sometimes seem like the right thing to, for tactical reasons, in order to deal with, what was back then, of course, a gap that had opened up because of the OBR's assessment, to try and plug that by cutting spending. It may make sense tactically, but strategically, a longer term approach is needed. And that's I think the big issue that the government has to face up to. And it is not easy to do. It is imbued with risk in every direction, as you said. The UK's extremely highly indebted. That's a problem that got worse, actually, over those 14 years of Conservative government. We're not able to, kind of suddenly open up borrowing in the way that Germany has, for example. We're not in as strong a position as they are. And also, of course, certainly working people are relatively highly taxed compared to in previous decades. But I think we have to face up to those big issues. And that would be, the main thing I think the government has to focus on.
You've given me a whole load of meat there that we can chew over in this pod. And I've actually got exactly what you were talking about fiscal rules and taxation in your resignation letter. And I really want to come on to that, because I think that is the massive challenge, isn't it, going into the second year of this administration. But before we get there, I just want to take you back to being in government and that moment after the election win. What was it like going into cabinet for the first time?
It was fantastic. I can't say anything else, because for so long I'd wanted to be able to change things. I've been desperate to be able to change things. Labour had been in opposition for so many years. I'd been on the front bench of the opposition for a really long time. And to finally be able to say, we're going to do things differently. We're going to be taking decisions that are going to improve people's lives in Britain. And when I was working on international development, hopefully globally as well, and to be able to represent my country internationally was such a privilege. I just can't underplay it.
What was your if you look back to that first 6 months, what was your proudest moment? What was the thing that really stuck in your mind as like, this is a moment that I'm going to, carry with me and really cherish?
I have to say that there were a number of them, actually, possibly because I would never have anticipated when I was younger. I didn't anticipate becoming a politician anyway, but I would never have imagined that, for example, I would be in Brazil, having just made an agreement with the Brazilian government about combating global hunger, and then got a huge hug from President Lula, which was not a moment that I'm going to forget. Again, I would say when we got that draft employment bill published, I was so excited to see that. And also to see actually a lot of new women MPs coming in who I'd campaigned with when I was party chair, and to see them in all their diversity, finally standing on the steps of Westminster Hall.
Really changing actually what Parliament and the cabinet looked like, So it was quite a different vibe, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Did you feel that?
Absolutely. Of course, I'd never been there in a different guise, so all of it was completely new. I'd never been inside number 10 before until I stepped foot in there for the cabinet meetings. But of course, also more women. Finally having that proper representation. So it was really exciting to be able to change things.
And then, Anneliese, let's fast forward to February. You become, at this moment, the first government minister to resign over policy. Can you just rewind to that, take us behind the scenes and tell us how you came to that decision? Like, what happened?
Yeah. So I... obviously was informed about the decision to boost our defence spending in its entirety from the international development budget. I had anticipated that we were going to need to be boosting defence, and I support that. I think we do need to make sure that we are more secure, and we need to be working very closely with a number of allies to deliver that. So I thought there would be that change. But I felt it was important to make sure that change was sustainable. And I was concerned that the immense soft power that we get from development, and of course people can mean a lot of different things from that term, but that was in some people's minds, certainly not the Prime Minister's, and he never has described it like this, but in some people's minds, it was being opposed to hard power, to military power.
Yes.
When I'd seen directly the opposite, I think it's fascinating, again, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to support for NATO having a role globally, it's very often those countries with which the UK has built a relationship, not just through development, but also through cultural exchanges, education, everything else, where we end up having allies and working together on those other issues. And there's, of course, other direct impacts as well. Big population movements that we're seeing are being driven by conflict. They end up having an impact on our country, whether that's through migration or because of those people becoming traumatised and that fueling terrorist movements. There's so many ways in which development does contribute to our security. So I couldn't support that decision. I argued against it. I didn't win the argument. That was why I decided that I would...
Around the cabinet table, or had the decision already been taken?
So I did put my views there. I won't go into too much detail, of course, because it's a private meeting, and rightly so. But I articulated my views on that decision. And when it was clear the decision wasn't going to change, I knew that I had to resign because I wanted to be able to defend government policy, and I couldn't, in all conscience, defend that.
Can you just talk us through how it actually works? Like, walk us through that.
Yeah, I think perhaps it was quite different for me than maybe for other ministers who might have resigned in the past, because I was very conscious of the fact that when I decided to resign, just a couple of days after then, the Prime Minister was going to be directly negotiating with President Trump, including around the security of Ukraine.
Yes.
And I didn't want him to go into that meeting with any headlines saying, discord at home, or, government in chaos or something like this. I didn't want that. I wanted there to be a clean run into that meeting. Obviously, I didn't agree with the decision we're just talking about, but I did not want either Ukraine's position or overall our country's interest to be compromised because of my view on that policy. So I waited before informing the Prime Minister of my decision until he'd come back to the UK. So I obviously had to think through, okay, when's the plane going to land? All those kinds of questions. And then, yes, obviously informed him that I had taken that decision.
Yeah, so I just to explain that a bit to listeners if they don't know the ins and outs of it, I do, because I was on the trip with the Prime Minister.
Ah, yeah.
And what happened was the PM announced his decision to increase defence spending ahead of going to see President Trump in the White House. This had obviously been a long ask of President Trump, and to do that, he was taking money from your budget, Anneliese. He was taking the money from the overseas development aid budget. He made that announcement at the beginning of the week, and then, as you said, he flew to Washington and had a very successful meeting with President Trump.
It's a very special place, and he's a special man, and the United Kingdom is a wonderful country. We've had a tremendous relationship, and frankly, the Prime Minister and I have met twice before, and we get along very famously, as you would say.
Our countries have been bound together for a very long time now. The closest alliance, I think, of any two countries when it comes to prosperity and security.
And then we were like, oh, this is a triumph. Keir Starmer has absolutely, nailed this trip. We come back on the plane, and then boom, on Friday, you announce your resignation. But it was pretty decent of you not to disrupt the trip, because you could have completely blown it up for Keir Starmer, but you chose not to.
Well, no, and I'm not interested in doing something that I felt would have been against the national interest, and it really was important that meeting went well, and that was at the top of my mind. I mean, on a very minor note, it clearly made me feel quite uncomfortable.
I was going to say, I knew
that
I was sitting on it.
Yeah, but that was a very small issue, really.
So you didn't tell anyone? Well, presumably you told your husband.
Yeah, but not many other people.
And you just sat on it, knowing that that's what you were going to do.
Yeah.
And how did that feel? Uncomfortable? Did you just feel a bit...
It did, because I had to engage in planning for events in the future when I knew that I wasn't going to do them. And obviously I always want to be as upfront with people as I
Yeah.
possibly can. I felt it was to the greater good that I did keep it private, and all the people with whom I couldn't be open at the time have been very nice about it.
You did the PM a big favour, though, in that. He must have appreciated that. You actively sought not to destabilise what was clearly a crucial meeting for him.
Well, I felt it was really important in that case to put our country's interests first. And obviously, I want the Prime Minister to succeed. I want the government to succeed. I have that disagreement, obviously, which was a really significant one. But I didn't feel it was the national interest to create a huge circus around my personal decision. It was a strange time when you take a decision like that.
It's quite a big decision.
Yeah, and your phone kind of blows up. It really is quite a strange thing.
Is this after it was made public?
Absolutely.
And what happened? Did you have reporters outside your door? Your phone melts down?
Yeah, pretty much.
Was that horrible? Or
it wasn't horrible because I obviously had known that I was going to do this. Actually, I have to say, I'm not saying this to butter you up, but all the reporters were absolutely lovely when I gently said to them, I don't think my neighbours are loving this. Can you please respect them?
What did the PM say to you when you said you were going to resign? You were his Shadow Chancellor. When he became elected, you were his right-hand woman. I mean, you were really, really close to Keir Starmer, and I assume you still are. You're loyal in the sense that you resigned, but you did it in a way that, however you privately might have felt about that decision, you did it in a way where that whatever that conversation was behind closed doors, and you didn't try and damage him.
Actually, it was both, yes, to not create problems for the Prime Minister, but above all, to not create problems for our country. We've seen what's happened when those meetings have not gone smoothly, and it was very much with that in mind, and that was how I approached it.
Do you regret it now?
I don't regret it. I do certainly miss being able to have that hands-on impact. It really was incredible, as I said at the beginning, being able to take decisions that would make that difference to people's lives, to try and make things better. And to be able to do that very directly was just an enormous privilege.
Anneliese, going back to your resignation letter and what you were saying earlier about the government needing to be bold rather than incremental in how they are adapting to what has been quite a rapidly changing world order and outlook in recent months. When you resigned, and this is from your letter, you were pretty explicit about what you thought about the aid budget being slashed to fund defence. You said you expected we would collectively discuss our fiscal rules and approach to taxation as other nations are doing. There wasn't, it doesn't seem like a collective discussion. And it seems to me that there still isn't a collective discussion within the Labour cabinet about this approach to fiscal rules and taxation. At least we're not seeing it publicly. I mean, this is about whether or not Rachel Reeves should change her fiscal rules. Are we taxing people enough? Can we afford to increase the defence budget and also continue to fund welfare payments, fund the NHS, etc., etc.? I mean, what's your view about that challenge for the government and the country?
I think it's really important that we do try and, as I say, take a step back and think about what's going to be necessary, looking 10, 20 years ahead. It looks like the world is not going to be becoming safer, unfortunately, during that period. I think, as I said before, it's really important that we do ensure that we increase defence spending, as I said. But we may well see the kind of global turbulence happening at the moment around trade continuing. It's possible, of course, that we could see a number of leaders being elected globally who may also take the view that disruption is the way to achieve their ends. And we need to be, I think, prepared for that. Now, for me, as I said in the letter, you just mentioned again now, I think that does mean we've got to really carefully consider those issues about our fiscal rule and about taxation. That isn't easy, and where I've been a bit frustrated with some of the debate, I suppose, is where there's been suggestions that there might be some kind of a magic wand, that you could just change fiscal rules and there wouldn't be any cost from that. There would be cost. I believe it's not in our long-term interest to be seeking to trim spending in order to hit a particular range, obviously, that relates to forecasts a number of years. Hence, they embed a number of assumptions. But particularly to be having to do that more than once a year. I mean, I understand why it was undertaken. But I think, again, this goes back to what's going to make sense in 5 or 10 years' time and not in, say, a few weeks or months. And it's really, really difficult to have that kind of overall long-term view, I think, in government because of those day-to-day challenges, as I said. But I think now is a time when we need to look at what other countries are doing. And then we do, I believe, need to think about taxation. Now, again, there's no magic wand. There will be implications from any change that would be made. As I said before, people are quite highly taxed working people now. But I think there are ways in which we can look at taxation, not without implication. They will have. But in a world of difficult trade-offs, we've got to take the least worst trade-off for the long term, and that's what I think is going to be really important.
You were the Shadow Chancellor, right? So you understand this stuff really well, better than most people in your party. I think the first thing you're saying is, if we look at the fiscal rules, the Chancellor obviously introduced these because of the need to be reliable to the bond markets, to show that the government would be prudent, to borrow a word for Gordon Brown, and careful with the public finances. And Rachel Reeves' main fiscal rule is that by the end of the current cycle, which is the end of this decade, the forecasts, that you do not borrow to fund day-to-day spending. So that would be, you're not borrowing money. If you had a house, it's like you're not borrowing to pay your electricity bill or your water bill. You might borrow against your capital, your house, but you're not borrowing to fund your everyday spending. And that's what she wants the government to do. I think what you're saying to me is that you think she needs to look at these fiscal rules again, and that maybe this is not trying to amend and fix the tax and spend every 6 months to fit the fiscal rules is causing the government a lot of problems and actually might not be doable. Is that what you're getting at, Anneliese?
I think for me the particular problem when it comes to the rules is the 6-month issue.
Right.
And I feel that's injecting more uncertainty into the system.
Just explain that, just so people that don't understand that.
Well, because essentially you're having to, either increase taxes, which you can't do if you're talking about the spring, because that's something that's done in a budget, or cut spending in order to ensure that you're not having consumption spending, so kind of day-to-day spending going over receipts at a certain point in time. But that relies on a projection of what the economy is going to be doing, because what the economy is doing will impact on how much tax you have in. Now, predictions around that are notoriously changeable, and I don't think anyone would contest that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't make predictions. It certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't have rules. And, I do support us having fiscal rules. I think it was the right thing to do. I think what Rachel did around ensuring that investment spending is counted differently is really important.
You can borrow to spend on investment,
Yeah, and that has opened up a big programme of investment, which I think is going to be realising economic returns. But I think it's this kind of shorter term challenge.
but you don't think necessarily the fiscal rules need changing. You're
I
talking
think-
about the process and the timing, so you have a bit more space between your homework being marked, if you like, from the fiscal watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility. But what about the actual fiscal rules? Because that's what a lot of your colleagues are talking about.
So I think there is a discussion about how we assess government spending. I think it's the right discussion to have. We saw some really interesting decisions from the OBR recently around, for example, how it was going to score investment, and I think they've adopted a better approach around that. I was pleased to see that.
So what you're saying is that you think that there needs to be a reassessment about how the OBR in a way scores government investment spending, because what you're suggesting is that you think they're scoring it in a way that doesn't give the government enough credit, or it doesn't give that there's more wriggle room, if you like, in the forecast than they are being afforded. I guess the risk is, and you know this, that then it becomes a case of people saying that the Labour government are trying to cook the books because they just want to be profligate with spending.
Yes, absolutely. And what that cannot result in is a kind of free-for-all, right? This isn't a recipe for a bonanza. It's actually a recipe for a really clear framework where you have a hard-edged look at what's going to deliver growth.
Okay, so that's the fiscal rules. What about taxation? I mean, there's a massive live conversation in the party now about whether or not there should be more taxation, more wealth taxes.
I do think that it's important we consider who has the broadest shoulders when these issues are considered. There has been, you're right, a lot of discussion going on around, in inverted commas, a wealth tax. I've been a bit sceptical about some of those claims for a long time because, of course, wealth is taxed in the UK. I think what has changed the debate, however, is the work that was undertaken by the Commission on Wealth Tax. They looked at the operation of lots of different wealth tax internationally. They looked at all of that evidence and set out how it would be possible to deliver something like that in a UK context. Okay. I would hope that the Treasury is considering that kind of evidence, as well as other changes that have been put forward. I mean, we've seen the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, for example, put forward suggestions, as I understand it. Yeah. I think it's important for all of those to be considered now.
Okay. It's so interesting, Anneliese, because in sort of one answer, you made me think two things. Those with the broader shoulders should pay, or, you know, take the higher burden or should bear the cost. That's something I've heard Keir Starmer say a number of times. And then you have there, you're talking about the government should at least consider some forms of wealth tax. And you're right. I mean, we say wealth tax, but that can be multiple forms. And Angie Rayner, as you said, the Deputy Labour leader, had put some suggestions of certain types of wealth tax into the Treasury ahead of the spending, the spring statement and the spending review, in order to say, do you want to, maybe you do need to levy some more tax. I mean, I think if Rachel Reeves was listening to this podcast, she'd absolutely hate what you just said about wealth taxes, and I think she's very opposed.
I have to say I've not spoken directly with her about this. I'm sure, as I mentioned before, she would be right to be sceptical about any claims that any of these would immediately change the fiscal situation of the government. But I think the trade-off we have to consider in a world of lots of difficult trade-offs is potentially making some big and significant changes early, or having to make many tactical changes
through the Parliament.
Exactly, and potentially being forced into some of those difficult decisions anyway later on.
Which is kind of where you see the welfare landing.
Yes, I think that was an area where an attempt was made to deal with a quite immediate problem. But I don't think you can, particularly via cuts, actually deliver the kind of fiscal room that is necessary. But I know Rachel will be thinking deeply about this, of course.
You talked a bit about being in Cabinet, how much it meant to you, enjoying being able to affect change. You worked for it your whole career. What's it like now for you being out of cabinet, and what are you working on now? Because also you've got 2 young kids as well. Like you're running 100 miles with a young family as well. Has that given you a bit more time to do some stuff that you're actually enjoying and really interested in?
Yeah, I mean, it did give me the chance to take a step back and think, well, what would I really want to be focused on if I was coming into politics anew now? I'm actually not someone who ever expected I would be a politician. You know, for a very long time, I worked in universities and then became an MEP and then MP.
Yeah.
But when I came in, quite quickly, I ended up working on first economic issues and then obviously as chair, women and equalities and so forth. And that decision wasn't exactly taken for me, but I've not had that freedom to think about what I will focus on in the future. And I think one thing that's really changed since when I first became politically active is the online space, both how people discuss politics online, the boundaries for that discussion and how much more polarised it is, how much more extreme some of it is, unfortunately, and also the power of some of those companies which are engaged in this area, not just when it comes to people's use of social media, for example, but also, of course, the sale of advertising, how that's changed. It's having a huge impact on the media in good ways, like this podcast, and bad. So I've been able to take a step back and think, right, I want to do some more work on this. So I have been engaged more in that area since, and particularly also looking into foreign influence that's been exercised through often social media, unfortunately, including in our own country. And I think this is something that we need to become much more vigilant about.
Okay, so you're doing work on disinformation. So when you're ready, are you doing the research? Like when you're ready, maybe you can come back on and we could do a special episode on that, and we could talk about some of your findings. Would you be up for that?
I'd really like to.
Okay, well, that's a deal. I've locked you in. Don't go on any other rival podcasts. But look, okay, Anneliese, look, I've got a million more questions to ask you, but I've kept you too long already. We started out, didn't we, at the beginning, about your word to define Keir Starmer's first year. You chose challenging. How do you want the second year to be defined? What's the word you want? I haven't asked you what you expect. I've asked you what you want.
Well, half of that first word at the beginning probably also would have been, and you won't like this because I know it was our slogan at the election, but change. Because I still believe change absolutely is possible. There has been a lot of change that has taken place. We need a lot more. It's going to be harder to deliver a lot of it because of what we've been talking about. But my goodness, it's more important than ever.
Okay, so change. It was meant to happen in year one.
And a lot of it has. But
they actually, and I think to give them some credit as well, there's been a lot of things that have happened in terms of legislation that will take time to feed through, but you really want it to be the year of change. I imagine Keir Starmer does as well, because I think apart from anything else, he would want to change the fortunes of this government and try and kind of get back to being seen more favourably by the public. Well, look, Anneliese, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I can tell you with all sincerity that sometimes I don't enjoy conversations as much with politicians, but it was great because you said what you thought without being disloyal. And it's not an easy thing to do as a politician, so congrats to you. Get her back in cabinet, that's what I say.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.